Most people believe taxes are something you can see. A percentage on a paycheck. A bill passed in Congress. A headline debated for weeks before it quietly becomes law. People argue about income tax. They argue about property tax. They argue about sales tax. But the most powerful tax you pay is never debated. It has no bill number, no official name, no vote, and no expiration date. It operates continuously, silently, and without interruption. It takes more from you than any single tax ever could, because it is not one tax. It is a system of taxation layered on top of itself, tax upon tax upon tax upon tax, and it never stops. You already feel it. You feel it when your paycheck stretches less each year, even when the number on the pay stub goes up. The raise arrives, but relief never does. You feel it at the grocery store, where routine purchases now require mental math that never existed before, calculations about what to put back, what can wait, what is suddenly optional. You feel it when savings that once represented security now feel exposed, stagnant, slowly falling behind the world around them. You feel it when progress feels slower despite working harder, longer, and more efficiently than ever before. This pressure is not imagined. It is not personal failure. It is not poor planning or lack of discipline. It is the result of structural extraction built directly into the modern financial system. Productivity gains no longer flow primarily to wages. They are absorbed by debt servicing, asset inflation, administrative overhead, and monetary dilution. The system rewards scale and leverage while quietly penalizing labor and patience. Over time, this creates the sensation of running uphill on moving ground. Effort increases, output increases, yet stability erodes. That is not coincidence. That is design. My name is Marcus Blackwell. I am not a financial advisor. I study monetary systems, debt cycles, and the historical patterns that quietly shape nations long before collapse ever becomes visible. The invisible tax begins with inflation. But inflation is only the base layer, the foundation upon which every other hidden cost is built. Inflation is the silent erosion of purchasing power that occurs when the supply of money grows faster than the real economy can produce goods and services. It is not simply prices rising. It is the currency itself weakening. Each unit of money buys less, not because products suddenly became more valuable, but because the measuring stick has been altered. When governments spend more than they collect in taxes, they borrow to fill the gap. When borrowing grows too large and markets begin to strain under the weight, central banks step in to stabilize the system. This intervention is often framed as support, liquidity, or emergency measures. But in practice, it means new currency is created to absorb debt that cannot be confronted directly. When currency is created in excess, the value of every existing unit declines. Savings lose strength. Wages lag behind. Fixed incomes fall behind first. That loss is not absorbed by institutions. It is absorbed by currency holders. That is the first tax, silent, universal, and unavoidable. In the modern system, this process is managed by institutions like the Federal Reserve under leaders such as Jerome Powell, the European Central Bank previously led by Christine Lagarde, the Bank of England, and the Bank of Japan. These institutions do not operate in isolation. They respond to political pressure, fiscal realities, and debt loads accumulated over decades. Their mandates emphasize stability, but stability has quietly come to mean preventing collapse rather than preserving purchasing power. But inflation does not replace taxation. It multiplies it. It acts as a force multiplier that quietly amplifies every existing tax in the system without requiring new legislation or public debate. Instead of one visible burden, it creates layers that compound over time, each one harder to see than the last. You are taxed the moment you earn. Income taxes are deducted before the money ever reaches you. Payroll deductions fund programs you may never fully use. Mandatory social contributions reduce take-home pay long before choices are made. Then inflation immediately erodes the real value of what remains. Even if your income rises on paper, the purchasing power of that income is quietly reduced. That is a second tax, applied continuously rather than annually. When you spend that money, sales taxes and consumption taxes apply at the register. But inflation has already raised the underlying price of the good or service before the tax is calculated. You are not just paying tax on what something used to cost. You are paying tax on a price that has already been inflated by currency dilution, higher input costs, and layered fees throughout the supply chain. The tax itself grows larger because the base has grown larger. That is a third tax, and each layer compounds the next, ensuring the burden never truly resets. Then come the layers that rarely get labeled as taxes at all. Regulatory compliance costs passed directly to consumers. Environmental surcharges embedded in fuel, electricity, food production, and logistics. Carbon pricing mechanisms that raise costs at every stage of supply chains. Insurance premiums increasing faster than benefits. Healthcare billing complexity driving administrative overhead. Banking fees for access to your own money. Payment processing fees on nearly every transaction, each cost justified independently, each small enough to avoid outrage. Together, crushing, inflation magnifies all of them. Energy policy decisions increase fuel and electricity costs. Those costs ripple through transportation. Transportation raises food prices. Food raises healthcare costs. Healthcare raises insurance premiums. Insurance pressures wages. Wages feed back into prices. Each stage taxed, each stage compounded. This is not accidental inefficiency. It is how layered taxation functions in complex economies. Modern tax systems have become quieter, not lighter. Instead of dramatic increases that trigger public backlash, the burden now rises through mechanisms most people never see or fully understand. One of the most effective is bracket creep. As incomes rise nominally due to inflation, tax brackets fail to adjust fast enough or fully enough to reflect real purchasing power. People are pushed into higher tax categories without becoming genuinely wealthier. They pay more simply for keeping pace with rising costs. Capital gains taxes deepen this distortion. Gains are calculated in nominal terms, not inflation-adjusted reality. When assets rise in price due to currency dilution rather than real value creation, those paper gains are still taxed as income. You pay taxes on growth that never truly existed. Savings face a similar trap. Interest may be earned, but inflation often erases more purchasing power than the interest provides. Yet taxes still apply to that interest, turning savings into a slow liability rather than protection. Property completes the cycle. Home values rise largely because the currency weakens, not because shelter has improved. Property taxes rise with those inflated valuations. Insurance costs increase. Maintenance costs rise. You are not rewarded for ownership. You are taxed for maintaining shelter in a system where standing still becomes increasingly expensive. Debt adds another layer. Governments inflate away obligations. Corporations protect margins through price increases. Banks reprice risk. Households absorb the shock. Interest rates rise. Loan terms extend. Minimum payments increase. You pay more for money that buys less. This is not mismanagement. It is a systemic design under debt saturation. This is why inflation is the most efficient tax ever created. It rarely provokes resistance because it does not arrive as a demand. It arrives as an inconvenience. It feels like annoyance, like friction, like life becoming slightly harder each year rather than something being taken outright. There is no single moment to protest, no bill to point to, no clear authority to blame. The loss is gradual, dispersed, and emotionally muted, which makes it far more effective than direct confiscation. As prices rise, people search for visible explanations. Corporations are blamed for greed. Supply chains are blamed for disruption. Individuals blame themselves for poor budgeting or lifestyle choices. Rarely is the underlying monetary mechanism examined. Inflation hides behind complexity and noise, allowing responsibility to diffuse across the system. Because it is misunderstood, it is tolerated. And because it is tolerated, it lasts longer than any explicit tax increase ever could. Visible taxes face resistance, debate, and reversal. Inflation persists quietly, year after year, reshaping behavior and extracting value without ever needing permission. History confirms this pattern. In ancient Rome, Currency debasement funded expansion and social programs until trust collapsed. In Weimar Germany, excessive money creation destroyed savings and destabilized society. In the 1970s, inflation hollowed out middle-class purchasing power while asset holders surged ahead. In every case, the public felt pressure long before understanding its cause. Today, the scale is unprecedented. Inflation is embedded not just in consumer goods, but in housing, education, healthcare, insurance, and financial assets. Asset inflation benefits those who already own assets. Wage earners lag behind. Inequality widens without a single new law being passed. And this is where the invisible tax becomes dangerous. Inflation reshapes behavior long before it shows up in official statistics. It quietly rewires incentives across the entire economy. Saving becomes irrational because money loses value while it sits still. Caution is punished. Patience is penalized. At the same time, debt becomes attractive because liabilities are repaid with weaker currency. Borrowing feels safer than saving. Risk feels necessary. People are pushed toward speculation not out of greed, but out of survival, simply trying to keep pace with a system that no longer rewards stability. As inflation persists, planning horizons shrink. Long-term goals feel uncertain. Trust in institutions erodes as promises fail to keep up with reality. When people stop believing that effort reliably leads to security, behavior changes at every level of society. You can see this shift unfolding now. Younger generations delay home ownership, marriage, and family formation because costs feel unanchored from income. Older generations work longer as retirement plans fall short of rising expenses. Businesses freeze hiring and delay investment to preserve cash. Corporations lay off workers to protect margins. Governments expand assistance programs funded by additional borrowing. Each response feels necessary in isolation, yet together they reinforce the cycle and deepen the instability inflation creates. Governments are trapped by the very structures they built to maintain stability. Cutting spending exposes how fragile many systems have become and risks social and political unrest. Raising explicit taxes invites immediate backlash from populations already under strain. Defaulting on obligations undermines confidence not only domestically but across global markets that rely on trust. Each traditional option carries visible consequences. So inflation absorbs the pressure quietly, spreading the cost across the entire population without a single announcement. Central banks continue to speak in the language of control and confidence, but their room to maneuver narrows as debt levels grow. Years of accumulated obligations limit how aggressive policy can be without triggering instability. Rate hikes risk crushing governments, corporations, and households under debt they cannot service. Rate cuts risk reigniting inflation and accelerating currency erosion. Each decision trades one form of stress for another. Stability becomes temporary, conditional, and fragile, maintained through constant intervention rather than lasting balance. Temporary relief may occur, and history shows this clearly. Inflation can slow for a period. Interest rates can rise or fall. Economic data can improve just enough to restore confidence. But these moments do not change the underlying structure. The debt remains embedded in the system. The incentives that created the problem remain intact. Governments still depend on borrowing. Central banks still manage stability through liquidity. And as long as those conditions persist, layered taxation continues, quietly compounding in the background even when headlines suggest improvement. This is why life feels heavier over time, why progress feels slower despite greater effort, why stability feels fragile even during periods labeled as recovery. You are not failing. You are operating inside a system optimized for gradual extraction rather than structural reform. It is designed to delay reckoning, not eliminate imbalance. The pressure is not a personal shortcoming. It is systemic weight. Inflation is not a single force acting alone. It is the engine that allows tax upon tax upon tax upon tax to function without resistance. It ensures the same unit of currency is taxed when earned, taxed again when spent, taxed while it is saved, taxed when it is invested, and diluted when it sits idle. Value is extracted at every stage, leaving no neutral ground. And this process does not stop on its own. This is not a call for panic. Panic clouds judgment and benefits no one. This is a call for awareness. History shows that those who recognize the cycle early do not panic. They prepare quietly. They protect purchasing power. They diversify exposure. They reduce reliance on systems that grow more fragile over time. They build resilience while others remain confused about why life feels harder. You are not imagining the pressure. You are not alone. You are living inside the most advanced tax system ever created, one that requires no announcements, no votes, and no permission. Tax upon tax upon tax upon tax. And it never stops unless you understand it. Now tell me in the comments where you feel this pressure the most right now. Food, housing, energy, savings, or debt, and what step you are taking today to stay ahead of it, because the wise prepare quietly, and the unprepared learn loudly.